Why isn't anyone helping? I muttered under my breath as chaos erupted around me on the crowded beach. People were screaming, pointing frantically toward the water, but nobody moved. Everyone stood frozen like statues, watching the nightmare unfold in real time. That's when I saw him, a small boy, maybe 7 years old, drifting farther from shore on an inflatable ring. The ocean current was dragging him out aggressively, and his tiny arms struggled to maintain grip on the plastic. Then, in one horrifying moment, the ring burst with a loud pop that cut through the screaming. The boy disappeared beneath the surface. My brain shut down completely. Instinct took over. I didn't think about my phone in my pocket or my brand new sneakers. I just ran straight into the crashing waves. Behind me, voices yelled warnings about waiting for the lifeguard, about dangerous riptides, about being reckless. I didn't care. That child had seconds, not minutes. I couldn't stand there and watch him die. The water was colder than I expected, and the current immediately tried pulling me sideways. I fought against it, swimming hard toward where I'd seen him go under. My lungs burned as I dove beneath the surface, eyes stinging from salt water, searching desperately in the murky blue-green darkness. There, I spotted his small form sinking slowly, arms floating limply at his sides. I grabbed him around the chest and kicked upward with everything I had. Breaking the surface felt like being reborn. I gasped for air while holding the boy's head above water, then started the exhausting swim back to shore. Waves kept smashing into us, trying to pull us back out. My muscles screamed in protest, but I refused to let go. When my feet finally touched sand, I collapsed forward onto the beach, immediately rolling the boy onto his back. He wasn't breathing. His lips had a bluish tint that made my stomach drop. "No, no, no," I whispered, hands shaking violently as I positioned them on his small chest. I'd taken a CPR course years ago during college, never imagining I'd actually need it. "Come on, buddy. Breathe. Please breathe." I started compressions, counting aloud, trying to remember the exact rhythm. 30 compressions. Then I tilted his head back and gave 2 rescue breaths. Nothing happened. I did it again, and again. My arms trembled from exhaustion and adrenaline, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Suddenly the boy coughed a wet, choking sound that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. Water poured from his mouth as he turned his head to the side, gasping and crying simultaneously. His eyes opened, unfocused and terrified, scanning the faces of strangers hovering above him. Relief hit me like a physical force. I sat back hard on the sand, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. My clothes were soaked, my lungs hurt, my muscles felt like jelly. But he was alive. The boy was alive and breathing. Then a shadow fell across both of us. I looked up to see a man standing there, tall, probably in his early 30s, wearing expensive designer sunglasses that reflected my exhausted face back at me. His white linen shirt was pristine and clearly cost more than my rent, paired with black jeans that somehow looked both casual and sophisticated. But it wasn't his clothes that caught my attention. It was his body language. Every muscle in his frame was tense, coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see it working beneath his skin. He crouched down smoothly and scooped the crying boy into his arms, checking him over with quick, efficient movements that suggested medical knowledge or at least thorough training. The boy clung to him immediately, small fingers gripping the linen shirt desperately. Only then did the man's eyes shift to me. I expected gratitude, maybe tears of relief, at minimum a simple thank you. Instead, he just stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger exactly, but it definitely wasn't warmth either. His eyes, striking blue-gray even behind the sunglasses, examined me like I was a problem to be solved rather than the person who'd just saved this child's life. His jaw remained locked tight, and I noticed a vein pulsing at his temple. Without saying a word, he pulled out his phone and pointed it directly at me. The camera shutter sound clicked twice. What the hell? I scrambled to my feet, water dripping from my clothes, confusion and indignation flooding through me in equal measure. Did you just take my picture? Who are you? His voice was cold, sharp-edged, demanding rather than asking. There was an undertone of controlled fury that made my spine stiffen defensively. Who am I? I repeated incredulously, my own anger sparking to life now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I just saved your son's life. And you're interrogating me like I'm some son of criminal. He's not my son. The man's correction came out harsh and immediate, cutting me off mid-sentence. He's my nephew. And I need your full name and address. Right now. No delays, no excuses. Was this guy serious? I'd literally just performed CPR on his nephew, pulled him from the ocean, probably saved him from drowning. And now I was being treated like a suspect in a crime. My head was still spinning from the whole ordeal, and this bizarre confrontation wasn't helping. The man made a subtle gesture with his free hand, the one not supporting the trembling boy. Immediately someone appeared at my side. A large man in a dark suit materialized from nowhere, standing close enough that I instinctively took a step back. The security guard or bodyguard or whatever he was, had the blank, professional expression of someone who did this kind of thing regularly. Beckett, the first man said without taking his eyes off me. Get his complete information, full legal name, current address, phone number, identification if he has it. Everything. I stood there in my soaking wet clothes, surrounded by curious onlookers who'd started filming on their phones, feeling like I'd entered some kind of alternate reality. This wasn't how rescuing someone was supposed to go. Where was the heartfelt reunion? The tearful thanks? The basic human decency? The man turned away without another word, adjusting his grip on the boy who had his face buried against that expensive shirt, tiny body still shaking with residual sobs. He walked toward the parking lot with long, purposeful strides, leaving me standing there with his security guard looming nearby, demanding my personal information like I'd done something wrong. As I mechanically recited my details to Beckett, still too stunned to really process what was happening, I watched the man disappear into a sleek black car that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years. He never looked back. Not once. I stood on that beach, dripping wet, utterly bewildered, as confused as I was angry. I jumped into dangerous water without hesitation to save a child's life. And somehow, that had led to being photographed, interrogated, and dismissed without even basic courtesy. 3 days later, when the courier arrived with the legal notice, I realized things were about to get much, much stranger. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for a full minute before I worked up the nerve to open it. It was thick, expensive paper stock with embossed lettering that screamed law firm. My name and address were printed in formal typeface that looked more like a wedding invitation than regular mail. Except wedding invitations don't typically fill your stomach with dread before you even open them. I tore it open and pulled out the contents. Official letterhead. Legal language. Words that made my blood run cold. On behalf of Atlas Incorporated, you are hereby issued a formal summons regarding potential charges of reckless endangerment and unauthorized intervention. Your presence is required at our legal offices at the appointed time listed below to address this matter. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something fundamental. Reckless endangerment, unauthorized intervention. I'd saved that boy's life at the beach. I'd performed CPR. I'd risked my own safety to pull him from the water while everyone else just stood around watching. And now I was being threatened with legal action? My hands crumpled the paper involuntarily as rage flooded through me. Hot and immediate. This was insane. Beyond insane. This was some kind of nightmare scenario where doing the right thing got you punished instead of thanked. I grabbed my phone, ready to call. Who? A lawyer I couldn't afford? The police to file a complaint about being harassed for helping someone. Instead, I forced myself to calm down and reread the notice more carefully. There was an address downtown, naturally, in one of those glass skyscrapers where rent for a single floor probably exceeded my annual income. There was a time tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, and there was a contact name, Atlas Mercer. See, Atlas. The man from the beach. Of course. I barely slept that night, running through scenarios in my head, trying to figure out what possible legal standing he could have. By morning, my anger had transformed into grim determination. If this Atlas Mercer wanted a confrontation, he'd get one. I might not have his money or power, but I had the truth on my side. The next afternoon, I stood in front of a building that looked like it was made entirely of mirrors and ambition. The lobby alone was more impressive than anywhere I'd ever worked, with marble floors so polished I could see my reflection and a ceiling that stretched up at least 3 stories. Security guards in crisp uniforms monitored everyone who entered, and the reception desk looked like something from a science fiction movie. I gave my name to the receptionist, a woman with perfect makeup and an expression that suggested I wasn't the kind of visitor she usually dealt with. She made a call, then directed me to a private elevator with the kind of polite coolness that made it clear I didn't belong here. The elevator climbed smoothly to the 40th floor. When the doors opened, I stepped into what could only be described as a power corridor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. Artwork that probably cost more than my car hung on walls. Everything was designed to intimidate, to remind visitors exactly how small and insignificant they were. Another receptionist, equally polished, had me wait in a conference room. I sat in a leather chair that was more comfortable than my bed at home, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and influence, feeling my anger reignite. Who did this guy think he was? The door opened precisely 10 minutes later. He looked different in a suit. The beach had been all casual linen and sunglasses, but this was his natural habitat, a three-piece charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His dark hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place, and those blue-gray eyes that had photographed me on the beach, now fixed on me with the same intensity but in a completely different context. Here he was in control. Here he had all the power. Atlas Mercer. He extended his hand across the conference table, the gesture somehow managing to be both professional and impersonal simultaneously. I didn't take it. I stayed seated, arms crossed, meeting his gaze with as much defiance as I could muster. You sued me for saving your nephew's life. Forgive me if I'm not interested in shaking hands. Something flickered across his face. Surprise maybe, or possibly approval that I wasn't going to roll over easily. He lowered his hand without apparent offense and took the seat across from me, folding his hands on the table surface with deliberate precision. Sit down properly, Michael. He used my first name like he had every right to it, which technically he did since his security guard had extracted all my information 3 days ago. I'm comfortable standing. Sit down. This time there was steel in his voice, the kind of authority that probably made his employees jump. It made me want to stay standing out of pure spite, but I also wanted to hear what he had to say. So I sat, but I made sure my posture radiated hostility. Atlas opened a folder in front of him. My folder, I realized with growing unease. He'd done more than just get my basic information. This was a complete background check. Michael Chen, age 28. Freelance graphic designer specializing in small business branding. You rent a 1-bedroom apartment in the East District. Drive a 7-year-old sedan. Have no criminal record. Decent credit score, and according to your social media presence, you volunteer at an animal shelter twice a month. He recited the facts without looking at the file, which meant he'd memorized them. You seem like a genuinely good person, which makes what happened at the beach even more problematic. Problematic? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. I saved a drowning child. How is that problematic? The lifeguard was 40 seconds away. You had no professional training in water rescue. The current that day was classified as dangerous by beach safety standards. You could have drowned. You could have made the situation worse. You could have injured Cody with improper CPR technique. He counted off each point on his fingers like he was listing items on a grocery list rather than critiquing a life-saving rescue. So you're saying I should have just watched him die? Waited around while your nephew drowned because I don't have the right certification? My voice was getting louder, but I didn't care anymore. That's your argument? I'm saying there are protocols for a reason. Proper procedures that exist to hell with your protocols. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Your nephew was dying. Nobody else was helping. So I helped. And if you think I'm going to apologize for that, or feel guilty or let you intimidate me with legal threats, you're absolutely wrong. For a long moment, Atlas just looked at me. Then surprisingly, he slid another folder across the table, thinner than the first one. The case has been dismissed. As of this morning, I issued the order myself. I froze, hand halfway to the folder. What? There was never going to be an actual lawsuit, Michael. I needed to get you here, in person, so we could have this conversation face to face. His expression had shifted slightly, some of the corporate armor cracking to reveal something more complicated underneath. I needed to meet the man who saved Cody's life properly. to understand who you are. You could have just called, or sent a normal invitation, or literally anything except threatening me with legal action. My anger was still there, but confusion was starting to mix with it. Atlas stood up, moving to the window with his back to me. Cody is my nephew. His mother, my sister Iris, is currently in the hospital undergoing treatment for stage 3 cancer. His father, he paused, jaw working as he chose his words carefully. His father wasn't interested in being part of a family that included illness and difficulty. He left when Iris was diagnosed. I have temporary guardianship. Legally and practically, I'm all Cody has right now. The anger started draining out of me, replaced by something more complicated. Sympathy? Understanding? I wasn't sure. I'm responsible for that boy's safety, Atlas continued, still staring out at the city. When I saw him in the water, when I realized he was drowning and I wasn't close enough to reach him, I've never felt so helpless in my entire life. And then you were there. You saved him when I could. He finally turned to face me, and I was startled to see genuine emotion in those controlled features. But I also had to know who you were. Had to make sure you weren't someone who might use this situation against us somehow. We have money. That makes us targets. So the background check, the intimidation, all of that, was me being paranoid and protective. And yes, probably going too far. He walked back to the table, pulled out a business card and set it down between us. This is my home address. Cody wants to meet you. Properly. He's been asking about the man in the blue shirt who saved him every single day since it happened. He drew you a picture. He talks about you like you're a superhero. I picked up the card, the embossed letters elegant against the heavy stock. An address in an exclusive neighborhood I'd never be able to afford to live in. Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. Dinner. If you come, Cody will be thrilled. If you don't, Atlas met my eyes directly. I'll understand. After how I've treated you, you'd have every right to refuse. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, Michael. Thank you. You saved the most important person in my life. I handled this entire situation badly, but that doesn't change the fact that I owe you everything. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in that expensive conference room, holding a card with an address and a decision to make. I should have thrown the card away, should have walked out and never looked back. But the image of that little boy coughing up water, crying in my arms kept playing in my mind. And despite everything, despite the threats and the intimidation and the bizarre way this man operated, part of me wanted to see that Cody was okay, that he'd recovered, that he was happy and safe. So the next evening, I found myself driving to the address on the card, wondering what I was getting myself into. The house was nothing like I'd imagined. Yes, it was large, mansion-sized, set back from the street behind security gates and a manicured lawn that looked like it required a full-time groundskeeper. But when Atlas opened the door himself instead of some butler or household staff, and I stepped inside, I realized this wasn't the sterile showpiece I'd been expecting. The entryway opened into a living room that looked lived in. Lego sets in various stages of completion covered most of the coffee table. Action figures were scattered across the carpet like a tiny plastic army. A half-built blanket fort sagged in one corner, and the massive television was paused on what appeared to be an animated movie about talking cars. The kitchen visible beyond had dishes in the sink and a bowl of cereal abandoned on the counter, milk probably getting warm. This was a home where a child actually lived, not a magazine-ready showpiece. He's been watching the door for 20 minutes, Atlas said, gesturing me inside. He dressed down from the corporate armor I'd seen yesterday, dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that somehow still managed to look expensive. Fair warning, you're basically a celebrity to him right now. Before I could respond, there was a sound of small feet running, and then a blur of motion as a boy came barreling around the corner. Cody looked completely different from the terrified, waterlogged child I'd pulled from the ocean. His hair was dry and messy, sticking up in several directions. He wore dinosaur pajamas despite it only being 6 in the evening, and his face lit up with recognition that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. You came? You actually came. He crashed into me with the full force of his small body, wrapping thin arms around my waist in a hug that squeezed surprisingly tight. Uncle Atlas said you might not want to visit, but I knew you would. Heroes always come back in the stories. I crouched down to his level, feeling my throat tighten unexpectedly. Hey there, buddy. How are you feeling? Any water still in those lungs? He giggled at that, shaking his head enthusiastically. Nope. The doctor checked everything. She said I'm perfectly healthy now. Because you saved me so good. She said you did the CPR exactly right, and that's why I'm okay. I'm glad you're okay. You gave me quite a scare out there. I was scared too, Cody admitted, his expression turning more serious for a moment. The water was really cold and I couldn't breathe, and everything went dark. But then you were there and you made it better. So I made you something. He grabbed my hand with sticky fingers, evidence of some snack consumed recently, and dragged me further into the living room toward the coffee table. Pushing aside Lego pieces with determination, he retrieved a piece of paper that had clearly been carefully smoothed out after being crumpled. The drawing was exactly what you'd expect from a 7-year-old. Stick figures with circle heads and simple features. But the care that had gone into it was evident. One stick figure with blue shirt and brown hair stood in wavy blue water, holding onto a smaller stick figure. The sun was a yellow circle with rays shooting out in all directions. Birds were simple V-shapes in the sky, and at the bottom in careful letters that suggested he'd tried his absolute best with the spelling. It said Michael the hero. This is incredible, I said honestly, touched in a way I hadn't expected to be. Can I keep this? Yes. I made it for you. I tried really hard on the spelling. Uncle Atlas helped me with hero because that's a tricky word. He looked up at Atlas with obvious adoration, then back at me with equal enthusiasm. Do you like swimming? Can you teach me to swim better so I don't almost drown again? Do you play video games? I have so many games and Uncle Atlas isn't very good at them because he works all the time. Cody, Atlas interjected gently, though I noticed the corners of his mouth quirk slightly at the video game comment. Michael just got here. Let him at least sit down before you interrogate him. It's not interrogation, it's called getting to know people. My teacher says that's how you make friends. Cody looked at me hopefully. We can be friends, right? Absolutely, we can be friends. I assured him, following him to the couch where he immediately climbed up next to me, sitting closer than necessary but seeming to need that physical proximity. Atlas disappeared into the kitchen and I could hear sounds of cooking, actual cooking, not just reheating something. The domestic normalcy of it all felt surreal given the office confrontation just yesterday. Cody filled the time by telling me everything about his life. In the way children do when they've decided you're trustworthy. His favorite color was green. He was in 2nd grade. His teacher was nice but gave too much homework. He missed his mom a lot, but Uncle Atlas video called the hospital every night so they could talk. He didn't like broccoli but loved pizza. He was building a Lego spaceship that was really complicated, but he was almost done. I listened, responding when appropriate, and found myself genuinely engaged rather than just being polite. There was something disarmingly honest about Cody's enthusiasm, his unfiltered way of sharing his world with someone he barely knew but had decided to trust completely. Atlas called us to the kitchen for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with marinara sauce and a salad. But he'd clearly put effort into making it nice. We sat at a table that was too large for 3 people and the meal started off pleasant enough. Cody dominated the conversation, bouncing between topics with the attention span typical of his age. Then, in the middle of describing his Lego spaceship for the 3rd time, he said something that changed the entire atmosphere. Michael, would you maybe want to stay here? Like live here with us? Atlas's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. I felt my own hand freeze. The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Cody? Atlas's voice carried a warning note, but his nephew barreled forward with the fearless honesty of childhood. It's just that it gets lonely sometimes. The house is really big and Uncle Atlas works a lot. And I know he tries, but he's tired all the time and sad when he thinks I'm not looking. But when you were here tonight, he smiled more. Real smiles, not the pretend ones he does for me. Cody looked between us with absolute sincerity. And I really like you. You make everything feel less scary. Atlas set his fork down carefully, and I watched him struggle for a response. His jaw was tight again, that same tension I'd seen at the beach. But this time it wasn't anger. It was something more vulnerable. Embarrassment maybe, or fear of what I might say. Michael has his own life, Cody. his own home and work and responsibilities. We can't just ask him to. Atlas was trying to redirect to smooth over the awkward moment. Why not? Cody interrupted with childlike logic. You always say if you need help, you should ask for it. And we need help. You said so last week when you thought I was asleep, but I heard you talking on the phone to Grandma. You said you didn't know how to do this alone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Atlas's face had gone carefully blank, the corporate mask sliding back into place to hide whatever he was feeling. But I'd seen the flash of pain before he locked it down. The admission that he was struggling pulled out by his nephew's innocent honesty. I should have made an excuse. Should have gently explained that Cody's request wasn't how the adult world worked. Should have finished dinner quickly and left with vague promises to visit again sometime. Instead, I heard myself say, I can't move in, Cody. But I could maybe visit more often, like a few times a week. We could play those video games you mentioned. I could help with homework. Would that be okay? Cody's face transformed with joy. Nodding so enthusiastically I worried about whiplash. Atlas looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise definitely, but also something that might have been relief. Or gratitude. Or maybe just exhaustion finally finding an outlet. You don't have to, Atlas said quietly after Cody had run off to find his video game collection. Leaving us alone at the table. He put you on the spot. You can change your mind. I don't want to change my mind. I surprised myself with how true that was. He's a good kid, and you're right, he's been through a lot. If visiting a few times a week helps him feel less alone, then that's what I'll do. Atlas stared at me for a long moment, and I watched his careful control crack just slightly. Why? After everything I put you through, the threats and the investigation, and treating you like a suspect instead of someone who saved Cody's life, why would you help us? Because he asked. I shrugged, feeling uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. And because sometimes people need help. And if you can give it, you should. Isn't that what you told Cody? About asking for help when you need it? Something shifted in Atlas's expression then. The corporate CEO melting away to reveal someone more human underneath. Someone who was tired and scared and doing his best in an impossible situation. Someone who'd been holding it together through sheer force of will and was starting to crack under the pressure. Thank you, he said, and his voice carried more weight than just 2 words should have been able to hold. Genuinely, thank you. Cody came racing back with an armful of video game cases and the moment passed. But as I settled in for what turned into 3 hours of gaming with an enthusiastic 7-year-old, providing commentary while Atlas watched from the doorway with something soft in his expression, I realized I'd just committed to something far more complicated than a few casual visits. When I finally left that night, with Cody making me promise to come back soon and Atlas walking me to the door, I felt the weight of that business card still in my pocket, except now it felt less like an obligation and more like an invitation into something I didn't fully understand yet. Same time next week? Atlas asked as I reached my car, his hands in his pockets, looking oddly uncertain for someone who commanded boardrooms. I'll be here, I promised. And as I drove away watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed some invisible line from which there would be no easy return. The next month unfolded in ways I hadn't anticipated, weaving itself into the fabric of my daily routine until I couldn't remember what life had been like before. I found myself at Atlas's house 3 or 4 times a week, initially telling myself it was purely for Cody's benefit. We'd spend afternoons building elaborate Lego structures that inevitably got more complex than the instruction manual suggested. I'd help him puzzle through homework assignments that seemed unnecessarily difficult for 2nd grade. We'd watch animated movies where he'd recite lines he'd memorized, acting out his favorite scenes with infectious enthusiasm. But somewhere along the way, without either of us acknowledging it directly, my visits stopped being just about Cody. Atlas would join us for dinner, and the conversations would extend long after the dishes were cleared. We'd move to the terrace after Cody went to bed, nursing glasses of wine while the city lights sparkled below us like earthbound stars. Those late-night conversations revealed layers to Atlas I'd never glimpsed in our earlier confrontations. The corporate armor would fall away piece by piece, leaving someone more vulnerable and infinitely more real. He'd talk about the weight of responsibility he carried, Not just running a company, but being the anchor for his entire fractured family. I'd share stories about growing up with parents who loved me but never quite understood my choices, about building a freelance career that felt fulfilling but precarious. One particular evening, the air was unusually cool for the season, and Atlas had wrapped himself in a throw blanket that made him look less like a CEO and more like someone you might pass on the street. He held his wine glass loosely, watching condensation form on the exterior as he spoke. Iris was always the strong one in our family, he began, his voice carrying a weight of memory. Valedictorian in high school, full scholarship to Harvard Law, built a reputation as one of the most formidable corporate attorneys on the East Coast before she was 30. When she got married, I thought she'd finally have the stability she'd worked so hard to achieve. He paused, taking a slow sip. Then her husband left 6 months after her diagnosis, just walked away from everything. His wife, his son, his responsibilities, said he couldn't handle watching her deteriorate. That's the word he used. Deteriorate. The bitterness in Atlas's voice was palpable, but underneath it was profound hurt for his sister's suffering. She tried to handle treatment while maintaining custody of Cody, working reduced hours, pretending everything was manageable. But cancer doesn't care about your pride or your schedule. When she finally admitted she needed help, I didn't hesitate. Cody needed stability, needed someone who wouldn't abandon him. So I took guardianship, restructured my entire life around being available for a child I barely knew how to parent. You're doing better than you think, I offered quietly, meaning every word. He turned to look at me then, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. Do you know why? Because you showed up. In the months since you've been coming here regularly. Cody laughs more. His nightmares have decreased significantly. He started talking about the future with optimism instead of fear. Atlas set down his glass carefully. And it's not just him. I've changed. Changed how? My heartbeat had accelerated without my permission. I've become attached to you, Michael. The confession emerged softly, almost reluctantly, as though saying it aloud made it dangerously real. I didn't plan for this, didn't expect it, but having you here has transformed this house from a place I was merely surviving in, to somewhere I actually want to be. I should have said something, but words seemed inadequate for the moment. Atlas moved closer, closing the distance between us until I could see flecks of darker blue in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I know this complicates everything. You came here to help a child who needed stability, not to become entangled in whatever this is developing between us. You didn't sign up for my feelings or my family's dysfunction. So if you want to establish boundaries, to clarify that your visits are purely platonic friendship, I'll understand and respect that completely. Instead of responding verbally, I reached out and took his hand, feeling his fingers intertwine with mine in a gesture that felt simultaneously new and somehow inevitable. I want to be here, Atlas. This isn't obligation or pity or anything except genuine choice. My choice, to be part of this, whatever this becomes. The relief that washed over his features was profound, followed immediately by something deeper, gratitude mixed with affection mixed with possibility. He opened his mouth to respond, but before any words could form, a small voice called out from inside the house. Uncle Atlas. Michael. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about monsters under my bed. We both laughed softly, the tension of the moment breaking but not disappearing entirely. The understanding between us remained, hovering in the space we'd created, promising that this conversation would continue eventually. We went inside together to reassure Cody that monsters weren't real, sitting on either side of his bed until his breathing evened out into sleep. As I drove home that night, my hand still tingled where Atlas had held it, and I knew with absolute certainty that something fundamental had shifted. We'd crossed an invisible threshold from which there would be no casual retreat. The question wasn't whether our relationship was changing, it was where that change would ultimately lead us. And for the first time in years, the uncertainty didn't frighten me. It felt like standing on the edge of something extraordinary, waiting to see if I had the courage to jump. Everything was progressing smoothly, settling into a comfortable rhythm that felt sustainable and right. Then Iris called with news that would restructure everything we'd built. She was being discharged from the hospital. The aggressive treatment protocol had worked better than doctors had initially projected, pushing her cancer into remission. She'd be coming home within the week, ready to resume her role as Cody's primary guardian. The medical team was optimistic about her long-term prognosis, barring any unexpected complications. I'd anticipated celebrating this development. After all, a child getting his mother back was unequivocally good news. But Cody's reaction caught me completely off guard. "Does this mean you won't visit anymore?" He'd asked the question while we were sorting through his toy collection, preparing one of the guest rooms for Iris's return. His small hands had stilled on the action figure he'd been holding, and when he looked up at me, genuine fear clouded his eyes. "Once Mom is here to take care of me, you won't need to come around, right?" I'd pulled him into a tight embrace immediately, feeling his slight frame trembling against me. "I'll still visit. That's a promise, Cody. Your mom coming home doesn't change how much I care about spending time with you." Nothing changes that, but even as I said it, I wondered if I was making a promise I couldn't guarantee keeping. When Iris arrived, she brought with her an energy that had been absent from the house, a vitality that made it clear where Cody had inherited his enthusiasm. Despite the toll treatment had taken, evident in her shorter hair and the careful way she moved, she radiated determination and warmth. She was beautiful in the way that strength makes people beautiful, graceful despite everything she'd endured. She found me in the kitchen that first evening, where I'd been preparing dinner to give Atlas and Cody uninterrupted time with her. "Michael," she said, and I heard emotion thickening her voice before I even turned around. "I need to thank you properly. Cody talked about you constantly during our video calls, about how you saved his life, how you've been here for him when I couldn't be. You gave my son back his smile when I was terrified he'd lost it permanently." Tears were streaming down her face, and I found myself unexpectedly emotional as well. "He's an incredible kid. Anyone would want to spend time with him. But you did spend time with him. You showed up consistently when you had no obligation to. You helped my brother carry a burden he was drowning under, even after he treated you terribly at first." She squeezed my hand firmly. "Our family owes you a debt we can never adequately repay." Then she said something that sent cold clarity through my chest. "But now that I'm stable and back home, I'm sure you're eager to reclaim your normal life. Atlas won't need to impose on your generosity anymore, and you can return to your routine without a child and a dysfunctional family taking up all your free time." I saw Atlas's jaw clench from across the room where he'd been playing with Cody. "Iris, Michael isn't an imposition. He's been—" I know, she interrupted with a gentle laugh. "I'm just saying you've both sacrificed enough. Michael, you've been incredibly generous, but you're free now. We can manage from here." The word "free" landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward with implications. Free to leave, free from obligation, free from them. Atlas caught my eye, and the desperation in that single look communicated everything he couldn't say aloud with his sister and nephew in the room. He didn't want me to leave. The thought of my absence clearly terrified him in ways he'd only begun to articulate during our terrace conversations. That night, after Iris and Cody had both gone to bed, Atlas found me standing outside, staring at nothing in particular. A light rain had begun falling, the kind of gentle drizzle that seems to muffle the world's sharp edges. "Can we talk?" His voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before, vulnerability stripped of all pretense. I nodded, watching him step fully into the rain without bothering to shield himself from it. Water began darkening his shirt, flattening his hair against his forehead. But he seemed oblivious to the discomfort. "I need to tell you something," he began, and his hands were visibly shaking. "I've fallen in love with you, Michael." The world contracted to just the two of us, the soft percussion of rain the only soundtrack to this moment that felt both inevitable and impossible. I know how this sounds, sudden, complicated, potentially unwelcome, but I need you to understand that this isn't about gratitude or convenience or needing help with Cody. This is about you specifically, how you laugh at Cody's terrible jokes, how you remember which of my coffee mugs is actually my favorite even though they all look identical, how you've made this house feel like an actual home instead of just an address where we happen to sleep. He moved closer, rain streaming down both our faces now, making it impossible to distinguish tears from weather. "Don't leave because Iris is back. Don't leave because you think your purpose here has expired. Stay because you want to be here. Stay because this is where you belong. Stay with us, with me, not as a visitor but as family. As my partner. Please." My heart had never beaten this fast, never felt this full of simultaneous fear and hope. I reached up, cradling his face between my hands, feeling rainwater slip between my fingers. I love you too, Atlas. I want to stay, not because Cody needs me or Iris encouraged it or any external reason. Because being here, being with you, feels like the first completely right decision I've made in my entire life. He kissed me then, slowly, deeply, honestly, while rain continued falling around us like the sky's benediction on this moment. We were choosing together. 3 months transformed everything in ways both subtle and profound. I'd officially moved into Atlas's house. My apartment lease expired, and my belongings integrated into spaces that now felt like ours rather than his. Iris had not only accepted this development but actively encouraged it, pulling me aside one afternoon to express her genuine happiness at seeing her brother experience joy again. I haven't seen him this settled in years, she'd confided. You've given him something I was afraid he'd lost forever, hope for a future that includes love. The proposal came on an ordinary Tuesday evening, which somehow made it more perfect than any elaborate plan could have achieved. Cody had finally succumbed to exhaustion after a particularly energetic day, sprawled across his bed in that boneless way children sleep. Atlas and I were cleaning up the remnants of dinner when he suddenly stopped mid-motion, dish towel dangling forgotten from his hand. "Marry me," he said simply, producing a small velvet box from his pocket, as though he carried such things routinely. The ring inside was elegant without being ostentatious, a single band of platinum that caught the kitchen light and threw back tiny rainbows. "You're proposing over dirty dishes?" I'd asked, laughing through tears that were already forming. "I'm proposing in the life we've built together, the real one, with messy kitchens and exhausted kids and Wednesday nights that feel more significant than any grand gesture ever could." He'd smiled then, vulnerable and certain simultaneously. "I don't need elaborate romance. I just need you permanently and officially. Will you marry me, Michael?" My answer required no deliberation. Yes. Absolutely yes. Today we'd return to where everything began. The same stretch of beach where I'd pulled Cody from the ocean, where fear and desperation had accidentally sparked the most important relationship of my life. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. Cody played near the waterline, his new life jacket bright orange against the blue-gray waves. He'd conquered his fear of the ocean through patient practice and unwavering support, learning to respect the water without letting terror paralyze him. Iris sat nearby under a large umbrella, looking healthy in ways that still seemed miraculous, absorbed in a novel but glancing up periodically to check on her son. Atlas stood beside me, our hands linked, his thumb tracing absent patterns against my palm. The engagement ring on my finger we'd chosen matching bands. A unified statement caught sunlight and threw it back in golden flashes. "Did you ever imagine that morning would lead to this?" I asked, watching Cody discover a sand dollar and hold it up triumphantly for our inspection. Atlas brought my hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles with deliberate tenderness. Not even remotely. I thought I was racing to the beach to deal with a crisis, to fulfill my responsibility as guardian. I never anticipated meeting someone who would fundamentally alter everything I believed about my capacity for connection. "Papa Michael, Papa Atlas." Cody's voice carried over the sound of surf and seagulls. "Look what I found. It's completely intact, Papa Michael." The title still sent warmth through my chest every time he used it. Still felt like the highest honor anyone had ever bestowed upon me. We walked over to admire his treasure, praising his careful handling of the fragile shell. "Can we keep it?" He looked between us with hope that suggested he already knew our answer. "We can keep it," Atlas confirmed, ruffling his nephew's, our son's damp hair affectionately. "We'll find the perfect spot to display it at home." Home. The word encompassed so much more than a physical structure now. It represented belonging. Acceptance, chosen family forged through crisis and sustained through conscious commitment. It meant late-night conversations and early morning chaos, homework assistance and business calls, individual dreams and collective planning. Iris joined us, slipping an arm around my waist in the comfortable way she'd developed since accepting me fully into their family circle. "You three are disgustingly adorable together," she teased gently. "I'm going to need to start taking pictures for embarrassing slideshow purposes." "Please don't," Atlas groaned, But he was smiling. The real smile that transformed his entire face, the one I'd learned to recognize as his truest expression of happiness. Cody inserted himself between Atlas and me, grabbing both our hands and swinging between us like a small, determined pendulum. "I love our family," he announced with the straightforward honesty that children excel at, even when Uncle Atlas makes terrible pancakes and Michael forgets to check my backpack for homework. "Hey," we protested simultaneously, then laughed at our synchronized reaction. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. We stood together on that beach, the location where everything had started with panic and terror, and I marveled at how life could redirect itself so completely. One impulsive decision to help a drowning child had led to this, a family I'd never anticipated, love I hadn't known I was capable of experiencing, belonging that felt like finally understanding what home actually meant. Atlas pulled me close, his arms secure around my shoulders, and I leaned into his warmth. Cody continued collecting shells with Iris supervising nearby, their voices carrying over the gentle evening breeze. "Thank you," Atlas murmured against my hair, "for jumping into the water that day, for coming to dinner despite every reason not to, for staying when leaving would have been easier, for choosing us." I turned to face him fully, seeing our future reflected in his eyes. Challenges certainly, but also joy and partnership, an unwavering commitment. "Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your family, for loving me even when it complicated everything." We kissed there on the beach while the sun set behind us, Cody's delighted laughter our soundtrack, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where I was meant to be. This imperfect, beautiful, chosen family had become my home in every way that mattered, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.